The backstage hallway smelled faintly of rain-soaked fabric, hairspray, and burnt stage lights when Hyunjin suddenly stopped breathing for a second, his trembling hand pressed tightly against the cold wall as the roaring screams from thousands of fans echoed through the arena like distant thunder. "Hyunjin?" The voice cut through the chaos sharply, but Hyunjin barely reacted. His chest rose unevenly. Sweat dripped from the strands of blonde hair sticking to his forehead, while the world around him blurred into dizzy fragments of flashing red exit signs and hurried footsteps. Then Felix reached him. Without hesitation, Felix wrapped both arms around Hyunjin's shaking body and pulled him close enough that neither cameras nor staff could see the tears silently gathering in Hyunjin's eyes. "I'm here," Felix whispered softly against his ear, and somehow those two words hurt more than silence ever could. The hallway became quieter after that, though the concert outside was still exploding with music and cheers. Hyunjin's fingers slowly gripped the back of Felix's hoodie as though he was trying to survive a storm no one else could see. Felix felt it immediately, the fear, the exhaustion, the secret Hyunjin had been hiding for months. Hyunjin was always good at pretending. Too good. Smiled during interviews, laughed loudly during live streams, danced with breathtaking perfection under blinding lights, but Felix had started noticing the cracks weeks ago. The sleepless eyes, the untouched meals, the way Hyunjin stared blankly at mirrors as if he no longer recognized himself, and tonight something inside him had finally collapsed. "You should sit down," Felix murmured carefully. "I can't." Hyunjin's voice came out broken. "They're waiting for us," pulled away slightly just to look at him. Even under the dim backstage lighting, Hyunjin looked pale, fragile, beautiful in the most painful way possible. Felix said quietly, "Right now I'm the one waiting for you." For a moment, Hyunjin's composure shattered completely. His lips trembled, then he turned away fast, trying to hide it, but Felix already saw the tears slipping down his face. Hyunjin hated crying in front of people. Ever since trainee days, he had trained himself to endure everything silently. Harsh evaluations, loneliness, hate comments, endless pressure. Every mistake became another wound hidden behind elegance and perfection, but Felix knew the truth. Hyunjin carried pain like it was part of his skin, and tonight he could no longer carry it alone. A manager suddenly appeared around the corner, panic flashing across his face. "We'll live again in 3 minutes, nodded quickly while keeping one arm around Hyunjin. "We'll be there." Manager hesitated, noticing Hyunjin's condition, but eventually disappeared back toward the stage. Silence returned. Hyunjin laughed weakly, though it sounded closer to heartbreak. "You know what the scary part is?" Felix stayed quiet. "I don't even remember when I started feeling empty." The confession lingered heavily between them. Felix swallowed hard. He remembered the first time they met years ago. Hyunjin had looked untouchable back then, sharp eyes, graceful movements, endless confidence. Everyone admired him instantly, but Felix had noticed something different. Hyunjin always sat alone after practice, always stared at the ceiling too long, always smiled half a second too late, as if happiness was something he had to rehearse. "You don't have to keep pretending with me," Felix whispered. Hyunjin looked at him then, eyes glossy under the flickering lights. "That's the problem," he admitted softly. "I don't know how to stop." The distant bass from the stage vibrated through the floor beneath them. Fans were chanting louder now, unaware that one of the people they loved most was barely holding himself together only meters away. Felix suddenly remembered the message he accidentally saw 2 nights earlier on Hyunjin's phone while helping him search for choreography notes. "Are you ever enough for yourself?" It wasn't sent by anyone. Hyunjin had written it himself, and Felix hadn't stopped thinking about it since. "You know," Felix said quietly, "when I was younger I used to leave my bedroom light on every night." Hyunjin blinked slightly, confused by the sudden topic. "I thought if the room became too dark, all the bad thoughts would grow bigger." A faint smile appeared on Hyunjin's face despite everything. "That sounds like you." Smiled too, but sadness lingered in his expression. "Eventually I realized darkness doesn't disappear because of light. It disappears because someone stays beside you long enough." Hyunjin stared at him silently. The noise outside faded again, and for the first time in weeks Hyunjin's breathing slowly steadied. Felix reached up gently and fixed the strand of hair stuck to Hyunjin's forehead. Such a small gesture, yet it nearly destroyed the fragile wall Hyunjin kept around his heart. "Why do you care this much?" Hyunjin asked quietly. Felix looked almost offended by the question. "Because it's you." Honest, dangerously sincere. Hyunjin looked away again, overwhelmed by emotions he no longer knew how to process. Affection terrified him sometimes because it exposed every weakness he tried desperately to hide. The arena lights suddenly dimmed again outside. Their cue, Felix extended his hand slowly. "Come with me." Hyunjin stared at his hand for a long second before finally taking it, warm, steady, real. As they walked toward the stage entrance together, the roaring sound of thousands of fans exploded louder than ever. Bright blue lights flashed through the darkness while smoke machines filled the air with a metallic scent. The staff counted down urgently. 10 seconds. Hyunjin stopped walking again just before the curtain opened. Fear crossed his face once more, not fear of performing, fear of falling apart in front of everyone. Felix noticed immediately, so before the stage lifted them into the blinding lights, Felix suddenly pulled Hyunjin into another tight embrace, this time stronger, protective, certain. "I'm here," Felix whispered again. And Hyunjin closed his eyes because for the first time in a very long time those words finally felt believable. The platform rose, the crowd screamed. Cameras flashed endlessly like stars exploding in the dark, but something had changed. Hyunjin still carried exhaustion, still carried pressure, still carried wounds no audience could fully understand. Yet Felix remained beside him through all of it, not as an idol, not as someone trying to save him, but simply as someone refusing to let him drown alone. And somewhere beneath the deafening music, beneath the endless expectations and blinding fame, Hyunjin realized the thing he needed most was never perfection. It was this: a voice in the dark saying softly, "I'm here." The concert ended beneath a storm of silver confetti and screaming voices, but Hyunjin's smile disappeared the second the cameras turned away. His body moved automatically through backstage corridors crowded with exhausted staff and trailing cables, yet his mind felt distant, disconnected from everything around him. The adrenaline was fading too quickly now, leaving behind a hollow ache in his chest. Felix stayed close beside him without saying much. He understood Hyunjin's silence better than most people understood words. The members were laughing nearby, replaying funny mistakes from the performance while changing into comfortable clothes. Someone tossed a towel at Changbin. Jeongin complained dramatically about his sore legs. Bang Chan was already discussing tomorrow's schedule with the managers. Everything looked painfully normal, but Hyunjin felt like he was standing underwater while everyone else kept breathing easily above the surface. He quietly slipped away before anyone noticed. The dressing room door clicked shut behind him. Silence, at last. Hyunjin exhaled shakily and sat in front of the large mirror surrounded by glowing bulbs. His makeup was slightly smudged now, faint glitter still clinging beneath tired eyes. The reflection staring back at him looked elegant as always, but empty. His phone vibrated against the table. Thousands of notifications flooded the screen instantly, fans praising his performance, photos already going viral, comments calling him beautiful, perfect, untouchable. Hyunjin stared at the word perfect until it started feeling suffocating. His hand slowly tightened around the phone, then another message appeared from an unknown account. "You smiled tonight, but your eyes look dead." Hyunjin froze. The room suddenly felt colder. He knew he should ignore it. Idols receive strange comments constantly, some cruel, some obsessive, some terrifying, but this one unsettled him because it felt true. His breathing became uneven again. He locked the phone quickly and lowered his head, pressing both palms against his eyes as exhaustion crashed over him harder than before. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Hyunjin didn't answer. The door opened anyway. Felix stepped inside carrying 2 cups of warm tea. "I figured you'd disappear." Hyunjin forced a weak smile without looking up. "You know me too well," placed the drinks down carefully before sitting beside him. For a while neither of them spoke. The muffled noise of staff cleaning the venue echoed faintly outside the room. Then Felix noticed Hyunjin's trembling fingers. His expression darkened slightly. "Happened? Nothing, Hyunjin." A firmness in Felix's voice made him pause. Slowly, reluctantly, Hyunjin handed him the phone. Felix read the message once, then twice. His jaw tightened immediately. What kind of person sends something like this? Hyunjin shrugged weakly. "The kind that notices things." Looked at him sharply. "Do that." "Do what? Pretend this doesn't hurt you." Hyunjin laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's funny? I think they understand me better than I understand myself." Hated hearing him talk like that. Over the years, Hyunjin had become frighteningly skilled at turning pain inward, dissecting every flaw until he convinced himself he deserved the pressure crushing him. Felix reached over and quietly turned the chair so Hyunjin was facing him instead of the mirror. "Stop looking at yourself like you're a problem to fix." Hyunjin's eyes widened slightly. For a second neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavy with things neither dared say directly. Then Hyunjin finally whispered, "What if I already broke a long time ago?" Felix's heart ached hearing it, because Hyunjin wasn't asking dramatically, he genuinely believed it. Felix leaned forward slowly, elbows resting against his knees. "When I first came to Korea," he began quietly, "I used to record voice messages every night." Hyunjin blinked, surprised. "I never told anyone because it was embarrassing." "What kind of voice messages?" Felix smiled faintly. "Just reminders." Looked down at his hands. "Things like, 'You survived today,' or 'Maybe tomorrow will feel easier.'" Hyunjin listened silently. "There were days I wanted to give up so badly," Felix admitted. "I missed home, I missed my family. I felt lonely even when people were around me." His voice softened further. "Then someone would stay beside me long enough for the feeling to pass." Hyunjin swallowed hard. Felix looked up at him carefully. "You've done that for me more times than you realize." The room became painfully quiet again. Hyunjin remembered countless small moments suddenly flashing through his mind like scattered fragments of film, late-night convenience store trips, sharing headphones during flights, Felix falling asleep against his shoulder in practice rooms, conversations at 3 a.m. about fears neither of them admitted publicly, tiny moments, yet somehow they became the reason surviving felt possible. Hyunjin's eyes started burning again. He hated crying, especially in front of Felix, because Felix always looked at him like his tears mattered, and that made them impossible to hide. "I'm tired," Hyunjin confessed finally, not dramatically, not loudly, just honest. Felix's expression softened instantly. "I know, no, I mean really tired." His voice cracked slightly. "Tired of trying to be enough for everyone all the time." Felt something twist painfully inside his chest, because underneath Hyunjin's fame, talent, and beauty was someone constantly terrified of disappointing people, fans, members, himself, maybe even Felix too, but Felix only shook his head gently. "You don't have to earn your right to rest." Hyunjin looked down quietly. The tears came before he could stop them this time. Silent, warm, exhausted, Felix moved closer without hesitation and wrapped his arms around him again carefully, like holding something fragile and irreplaceable. Hyunjin buried his face against Felix's shoulder immediately, and suddenly all the pressure he'd been carrying alone began unraveling at once. The sobs were quiet at first, then harsher, rawer, years of exhaustion breaking through the cracks all at once. Felix held him tighter. "It's okay," he whispered softly. Outside, the arena lights were finally shutting down one by one. The noise faded, staff went home, the world grew quieter. But inside that small dressing room, Hyunjin cried until breathing no longer hurt quite as much. And Felix stayed exactly where he promised he would be, right there beside him. The rain started just after midnight, soft at first, then heavier against the windows of the moving van carrying them back to the dorm. Most of the members had already fallen asleep from exhaustion. Changbin leaned against the window with his hood covering his eyes while Jeongin quietly snored beside him. Bang Chan was still awake in the front seat, scrolling through schedules with tired concentration. But in the very back row, Hyunjin sat silently beside Felix, staring at the blurred city lights sliding across the rain-covered glass. The world outside looked distorted tonight. Almost dreamlike, Felix noticed Hyunjin hadn't touched his phone once since leaving the venue. That worried him more than tears. Normally, Hyunjin distracted himself constantly. Music, messages, videos, anything to avoid sitting alone with his thoughts. But now he simply sat there motionless, arms folded tightly around himself as if trying to stay warm. "You cold?" Felix asked quietly. Hyunjin shook his head. A lie, Felix could see the slight trembling in his hands even in the darkness. Without saying anything else, Felix removed his oversized hoodie jacket and gently draped it over Hyunjin's shoulders. Hyunjin blinked in surprise. "You'll freeze." "Australian, I'll survive." That finally earned a tiny laugh, small, fragile, but real. Felix relaxed slightly hearing it. For the next few minutes, only the sound of rain filled the silence between them. Then Hyunjin suddenly spoke without looking at him. "You ever wish we could disappear for a while?" Felix turned toward him carefully. "What do you mean, just leave everything behind for 1 week?" Hyunjin's voice remained distant. No cameras, no schedules, no expectations. His eyes stayed fixed on the rainy window. "No one watching every little thing we do." Understood immediately, because sometimes fame felt less like love and more like living inside a glass box where every crack became public entertainment. "You know what I miss most?" Hyunjin whispered. "What?" "Walking without hiding my face." The confession hurt more than Felix expected. Hyunjin used to love wandering aimlessly through streets late at night, tiny art shops, quiet cafes, watching strangers pass by unnoticed, but now every outing required masks, managers, caution, even loneliness had become public property. Felix leaned his head back against the seat slowly. "I miss hearing silence." Hyunjin looked at him then. "Silence?" Felix nodded faintly. "There's always noise now, music, fans, phones, cameras. Even when we rest, it never really stops." Rainwater streaked across the glass beside them like tears sliding downward. For a while neither spoke again, then the van suddenly hit a speed bump harder than expected. Hyunjin flinched sharply, not normal, instinctive, fearful. Felix noticed immediately. His expression shifted. "Hyunjin, answer." Felix lowered his voice carefully. "You've been like this all week." Hyunjin looked away again. "Fine, you jump every time someone raises their voice." Still silence. Felix's chest tightened slowly. He remembered practice 3 days ago. One staff member accidentally dropped a metal stand backstage and Hyunjin had frozen completely for several seconds afterward. At the time, Felix thought it was exhaustion. Now he wasn't so sure. "Did something happen?" Felix asked gently. Hyunjin's jaw tightened immediately. The reaction alone answered enough. Felix sat up straighter. "Hyunjin, I said I'm fine." Sharpness in his voice startled even himself. Several members stirred faintly in their sleep. Hyunjin instantly looked guilty afterward. Felix stayed calm, but inside worry was growing heavier by the second. Because Hyunjin only became defensive when something truly scared him. The rain outside intensified. Streetlights flickered across Hyunjin's pale face as the van continued through empty roads. Then quietly, almost too quietly to hear, Hyunjin finally spoke. "Someone's been following me." Felt his stomach drop. "What?" Hyunjin swallowed hard. "I didn't want to tell anyone because I thought maybe I was imagining it." Now he looked genuinely shaken. "They keep appearing everywhere." Entire body tensed. "What kind of person?" "I don't know." Hyunjin rubbed his hands together anxiously. A man, maybe late 30s, black cap, dark jacket. His breathing became uneven again. "I first noticed him outside the studio 2 weeks ago." Flashback memories flickered through Hyunjin's mind instantly. The feeling of being watched while entering the building at night. Seeing the same figure across the street near the dorm. A shadow standing too long near their waiting vehicles after schedules. At first he ignored it, then the messages started appearing online, not hateful, worse, obsessive. "I know you're lonely. You look prettier when you cry. No one understands you like I do." Hyunjin never showed anyone, not even the managers, because part of him feared he was overreacting, another part feared he wasn't. Felix stared at him in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell us?" Hyunjin laughed weakly. "Because everyone already worries too much. That's not your decision to make alone." The emotion in Felix's voice surprised him. Anger, fear, protectiveness. Hyunjin looked down immediately. "I'm sorry." Exhaled shakily and ran a hand through his hair. "Don't apologize." He softened his voice again. "I just hate knowing you were carrying this by yourself." The van slowed as they approached a red light. Outside, rain poured heavily beneath neon signs glowing blue and pink across wet streets. For a moment, Hyunjin looked impossibly young sitting there in Felix's oversized hoodie, exhausted eyes reflecting city lights like fractured stars. Not an idol, not perfection, just someone tired of being afraid. Felix made a decision then, firm, immediate. You're not walking anywhere alone anymore. Hyunjin blinked. Felix, I mean it. His tone left no room for argument. If you go somewhere, I'm coming too. A faint smile tugged weakly at Hyunjin's lips. You sound like a bodyguard. Fight dramatically if necessary. That soft laugh appeared again, short, but enough. Felix felt relief bloom quietly inside his chest hearing it. Then the van turned one final corner toward the dorm building. Hyunjin looked outside absent-mindedly and suddenly froze. His entire body went rigid. Felix noticed instantly. What? Hyunjin's eyes remained locked on the rain-covered sidewalk across the street. A tall figure stood beneath a broken street lamp, black cap, dark jacket, completely motionless despite the pouring rain, watching the van.
Felix turned toward the window so quickly his shoulder slammed against the seat. The figure outside didn't move. Rain poured heavily over the dark silhouette, distorting the face beneath the cap, but the feeling was unmistakable. Watching, waiting, Hyunjin's breathing immediately became shallow beside him. That's him, he whispered. The van continued rolling slowly toward the dorm entrance, tires cutting through rainwater while the street lamp flickered weakly above the stranger's head. Felix's heartbeat began pounding hard. At first, he tried convincing himself it could be coincidence. A fan waiting nearby, someone passing through the street. But then the figure slowly lifted his head and smiled, not warmly, not excitedly, just enough to make Felix's stomach twist. The dorm gates opened automatically. The van pulled inside. The moment the gates started closing behind them, the man stepped forward slightly out of the shadows, eyes never leaving the vehicle until the entrance sealed shut between them. Hyunjin immediately looked down. His hands were shaking again. Felix didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed Hyunjin's wrist firmly. We're telling Chan. No. Response came too fast, too desperate. Felix frowned. Why not? Hyunjin swallowed hard. If management finds out, everything gets worse. What's worse than this? You know how it works. And Felix did know. More security, more restrictions, more headlines, more fear. Idols often lost pieces of their freedom quietly whenever situations like this happened. Hyunjin already felt trapped enough. The van finally stopped underground. The members slowly woke one by one, stretching tiredly while managers discussed tomorrow morning's schedule. No one noticed the tension sitting silently in the back row, except Bang Chan. He glanced behind him immediately, leader instincts sharp even through exhaustion. You two okay? Felix opened his mouth. Hyunjin spoke first. Just tired. Chan studied him carefully for a second longer. Hyunjin forced a small smile. Eventually Chan nodded slowly, though concern lingered in his eyes. Get some sleep, he said softly. One by one, everyone climbed out of the van and headed toward the elevators. Hyunjin remained seated until nearly everyone left. Felix stayed beside him. The underground parking lot felt unnaturally quiet now. Only distant dripping water echoed through the concrete space. Hyunjin stared blankly at the floor. I didn't want you seeing that. Looked at him in disbelief. You think I care about that right now? Hyunjin's expression tightened slightly. I hate looking weak. The words came out barely above a whisper. Felix's chest hurt hearing them, because somewhere along the way, Hyunjin had convinced himself fear made him unworthy of protection. Felix leaned closer carefully. Hyunjin, no eye contact. You know what I see when I look at you? A faint bitter smile appeared. Probably a disaster. No, Felix's voice softened immediately. I see someone who survived things quietly that would have destroyed other people. That finally made Hyunjin look at him, and Felix held his gaze steadily. You're not weak for being scared. Silence afterward felt painfully vulnerable. Hyunjin's eyes glistened slightly again, though he blinked the emotion away quickly. I don't know how you always say the right thing, laughed softly. I absolutely don't. But you make things quieter. The confession slipped out unintentionally. Yet once spoken, it lingered heavily between them. Felix stared at him for a moment, then smiled gently. Good. Elevator ride upstairs was silent except for the soft hum of machinery and rain tapping faintly against distant windows. When the doors opened, the dorm lights were already dim. Most of the members disappeared toward their rooms immediately, exhausted beyond conversation. Hyunjin stepped inside quietly and removed Felix's hoodie from his shoulders. But before he could hand it back, Felix shook his head. Keep it. You need clothes too, you know. I have more. Hyunjin hesitated before quietly slipping the oversized fabric back on. The sleeves covered part of his hands, carrying the faint scent of detergent and Felix's cologne, warm, safe, dangerously comforting. Felix noticed Hyunjin glance nervously toward the dark living room windows, still afraid, still expecting to see someone watching outside. Without thinking much, Felix spoke first. "You can sleep in my room tonight." Hyunjin blinked. "I'll survive alone." That wasn't a question. A tiny smile tugged at Hyunjin's lips despite himself. "You're bossy. Only during emotional emergencies." That earned another quiet laugh, and Felix realized something then. Every time Hyunjin laughed tonight, the darkness in his eyes loosened slightly. Maybe healing didn't happen through grand moments. Maybe it happened like this, tiny pieces of light returning slowly. Hours later, the dorm finally became completely silent. Rain continued pouring outside, while the city slept beneath blurred neon reflections. Felix sat cross-legged on his bed, scrolling absent-mindedly through music recommendations, while Hyunjin leaned quietly against the headboard beside him. Neither seemed ready to sleep. The room glowed softly from a small bedside lamp, casting warm shadows across scattered hoodies, headphones, and half-empty water bottles. Comfortingly ordinary. Hyunjin stared at the rain outside the window for a long time before finally speaking. "When I was little, thunderstorms terrified me." Looked up immediately. "Really?" Hyunjin nodded faintly. "I used to sit in my parents' hallway because it felt safer than my room." A small smile touched his face at the memory. "Mom would eventually find me asleep on the floor every time." Listened quietly. "Carry me back to bed even when I got too heavy." Something about the softness in Hyunjin's voice made Felix's chest ache unexpectedly. "You miss home tonight," he realized. Hyunjin didn't answer directly, but his silence said enough. The rain intensified again outside. For a while, Felix simply watched him, the tired eyes, the vulnerability Hyunjin usually hid from everyone else, the quiet loneliness lingering beneath every expression. Then Felix moved without overthinking. He reached over slowly and intertwined their hands atop the blanket. Warm fingers, gentle pressure, no hesitation. Hyunjin looked startled at first, then emotional. Felix squeezed his hand softly. "You're not alone tonight." The words shattered something fragile inside Hyunjin completely. Because after weeks of fear, exhaustion, and pretending to be okay, someone finally stayed long enough for him to believe it.
Morning arrived too quickly. A pale grey light filtered softly through the curtains while rainwater still clung to the dorm windows like fading tears. The city outside looked exhausted after the storm, streets quiet beneath the cloudy dawn. Felix woke first. For a few seconds he stayed still, disoriented by the unfamiliar weight resting lightly against his shoulder. Then he looked down. Hyunjin had fallen asleep beside him sometime during the night, one hand still loosely intertwined with his. His breathing was slow now, calmer than it had been in days, strands of messy blonde hair falling over closed eyes, peaceful at least for the moment. Felix carefully studied his face. Without stage makeup, without bright lights or practiced expressions, Hyunjin looked softer, younger somehow, fragile in a way fans rarely saw. Felix felt his chest tighten quietly. He hated how tired Hyunjin looked even while sleeping. The dark circles beneath his eyes hadn't disappeared. Neither had the tension still faintly visible between his brows, as though even dreams refused to leave him alone completely. A sudden vibration broke the silence. Hyunjin flinched awake instantly, too fast, too alert. Fear flashed across his face before awareness returned. Felix noticed immediately. "It's okay," he murmured softly. Hyunjin blinked several times, breathing unevenly while trying to orient himself. Then embarrassment slowly replaced panic when he realized he had practically collapsed against Felix overnight. "Sorry," he whispered hoarsely, quickly sitting up. Felix frowned. "You apologize too much." Hyunjin rubbed tiredly at his eyes. "I drooled on your shoulder." "That's your biggest concern right now." A weak smile appeared. Tiny progress. Felix reached for the buzzing phone on the nightstand, expecting a manager's schedule message. Instead, his expression darkened immediately. Unknown number. Attached image. Felix opened it and froze. It was a blurry photo of Hyunjin entering the dorm building last night, taken from outside the gates. Rain streaked across the image, but the caption beneath it was painfully clear. "He looks prettier when he's scared." A cold feeling spread through Felix instantly. Hyunjin noticed his expression change. "What happened?" Felix locked the phone too quickly. "Nothing." Hyunjin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Felix." The hesitation alone confirmed enough. Slowly, Felix handed him the phone. The silence afterward became unbearable. Hyunjin stared at the screen for several long seconds. His face lost color immediately. Felix expected panic, fear. Instead, Hyunjin simply looked tired, like someone reaching the limit of what they could emotionally survive. "He found the dorm," he whispered. Felix stood up instantly. "That's it, we're telling Chan right now." This time Hyunjin didn't argue, and somehow that scared Felix even more. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and toasted bread when they entered. Bang Chan sat at the counter reviewing schedules on his tablet while Sumin microwaved leftovers with half-open eyes. Chan looked up first, then immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? Felix handed him the phone silently. Chan's expression hardened the moment he read the message. Sumin walked over curiously, then froze too after seeing the image. What the hell? The room suddenly felt much smaller. Chan looked toward Hyunjin carefully. Long has this been happening? Hyunjin leaned against the counter quietly. A few weeks. Sumin repeated in disbelief. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Hyunjin looked down. I thought it would stop. Chan exhaled slowly, visibly controlling his frustration, not anger at Hyunjin, anger at the situation. You should never handle something like this alone. I know. His voice sounded distant again. Felix watched him closely. Too distant. Chan noticed too. Hyunjin. Response, you with us? Hyunjin blinked slightly, as if pulled back from somewhere far away. Yeah. Felix recognized the signs immediately now, the emotional exhaustion, the detachment, the dangerous numbness growing underneath the fear. Chan stood up decisively. I'm contacting management. Hyunjin stiffened. Chan, no. The leader's voice remained calm but firm. This crossed the line already. Silence. Hyunjin looked toward the rain-covered window again, jaw tightening slightly. He hated losing control over his life. And after years under constant scrutiny, the idea of more security, more monitoring, more restrictions felt unbearable. Felix quietly stepped beside him, close enough for their shoulders to touch, grounding, steady. Hyunjin relaxed almost immediately from the contact alone. Chan noticed that too, his gaze softened slightly. You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore, he said quietly. For a moment, Hyunjin looked like he might cry again. But instead he simply nodded once, small, defeated. An hour later, 2 managers arrived at the dorm alongside additional security staff. The atmosphere immediately became tense. Questions, phone records, descriptions, discussions about changing routes and increasing protection. Hyunjin sat silently through most of it, hoodie sleeves covering his hands while anxiety slowly returned to his expression. Felix stayed beside him the entire time. Whenever Hyunjin's leg bounced nervously, Felix nudged him gently. Whenever the questions became overwhelming, Felix answered instead, protective without making it obvious. By afternoon, the dorm finally quieted again. Most of the members had left for practice schedules. But management allowed Hyunjin to rest for the day after noticing his condition. The silence afterward felt strangely empty. Hyunjin sat alone on the living room couch, staring blankly at the muted television screen. His thoughts spiraled endlessly. What if the fans found out? What if this became another headline? What if people blamed him somehow? Idols learned quickly that public sympathy could disappear overnight. A quiet sound interrupted his thoughts. Felix returned carrying 2 cups of instant ramen and dropped onto the couch beside him dramatically. I bring emotional support noodles. Hyunjin stared at him for a second before laughing softly despite himself. You're ridiculous. Handed him a cup carefully. Steam curled warmly into the air between them. For a while they ate quietly while rain continued tapping against the windows. Then Felix suddenly spoke. When I was younger, my mom used to say something weird whenever I got scared. Hyunjin glanced at him curiously. What? Felix smiled faintly. She said fear grows fastest in silence. Hyunjin looked down at the noodles thoughtfully. What stops it? Felix turned toward him fully. Being honest before it consumes you. The words settled deeply inside Hyunjin, because honesty terrified him more than fear itself. Honesty meant vulnerability, weakness, letting people see the broken parts he spent years hiding perfectly. Yet somehow Felix continued looking at those broken pieces without flinching, without leaving. Hyunjin swallowed hard. Does it ever scare you? He asked quietly. What does? Caring this much about someone. Went still for a moment. The rain outside softened gradually into silence. And when Felix finally answered, his voice came out softer than before. No, his eyes held Hyunjin steadily. Losing them does.